If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. Have you ever encountered or witnessed cryptids or other unknown creatures while outdoors? What's your story? This is not my personal story, but my dad's. I want to see what people think the thing in this story could be. So this happened a long time ago, before he and my mom had gotten married. When they were dating, my dad and my mom lived in different states for a short period of time because of work. I don't remember where my mom was, but my dad was in Arizona. So when my mom visited my dad, he would have to drive a relatively long distance to get to the airport to pick her up or drop her off. Not only was it far, but the only road there was in the middle of the desert, so basically in the middle of nowhere. So one time, my dad dropped off my mom at the airport so she could go home. It was pretty late at night when he dropped her off, so now the outside was pitch black except for the light from the car's headlights. There were also, no cars at this time, so the road was completely empty. Well, my dad was just driving back home after dropping my mom off, not really worrying about anything, when he noticed something in the middle of the road. He slowed down to see what it was and saw what looked like a fairly big animal lying down and appearing to be dead. My dad told me he was fairly certain it was a deer. But he was looking at the animal from inside his car, and all of a sudden the animal sat up straight, looked at him, and just stared. He said he saw the skin of the animal move and that he saw a figure that looked like a person inside of it. But he didn't get a super good look because, without a second thought, he said, in his own words, "Duck this," and immediately drove around it and sped away. He told me that as he was driving, he could feel and hear something running alongside the car, and he started to panic. Right as my dad was saying a prayer in his mind and continuing to speed down the empty road for a few minutes, he finally felt like he had lost whoever or whatever had been chasing him. My dad said he doesn't believe it was something supernatural, but that he just felt an immense amount of fear in that moment and that he was in some sort of danger. He also refused to drive on that road if it was dark ever again because of that instance. So I don't know what that thing, animal, or whoever was in my dad's experience was. I kind of want to see if anybody has any information on what it could possibly be. Supernatural or not? I've been living in these apartment complexes in upstate New York since I was young, so I've seen many people come and go. The complex has a wooded area behind it that me and my friends used to explore and play in when we were young. We found some strange things, old voodoo-looking dolls and clay pots and bowls. Strange stuff that didn't seem so strange when we were so young. Next to the wooded area was a building that us kids that lived in the complexes went to get help with homework. The place has since closed down. There would be students from local colleges volunteering to come and help us with our homework. One day, when getting off the bus, one of the volunteers was waiting for me and a friend. She said she needed a translator for a woman who needed help. When we got to the office, the woman was in noticeable shock. She was an elderly lady who spoke Russian, my native language. She began explaining that she had seen a human-like face with a bear-like body come out of the woods when she was going for a walk and approach her. She said the creature was an animal she had never seen before, and it looked demonic. When we explained this to the volunteers, I remember them brushing it off. Obviously, the women sounded crazy. I never saw those women again and almost forgot about the incident since it was so strange. Some years later, we had a family friend who was coming to my apartment to hang with my mom. I was in my room, but I could still hear their conversation. She said she had been walking behind my apartment late last night with her dog when she saw something in the woods stalking her. She said it was all hairy and almost looked like a human, but she couldn't explain it. She said she was scared for her life, and when she made eye contact, the animal ran away. This was in the same area where the women from years before also saw the creature. The way she was explaining it was almost exactly like the women from years before. I remember sleeping with my blinds closed for some time after. I'm planning on moving out of here in the next couple weeks. I still don't know what a reasonable explanation could be for both of these women, who have never met but saw the same creature years apart. There would be no benefit to making up such a story. I don't believe in ghosts, demons, or anything like that, but maybe something else. I'm a 16-year-old boy, and this happened to me when I was 8. I went to Mexico to visit my grandparents with my 2 brothers for the summer. It was good over in Mexico. We visited many places, like the Aztec ruins and the tropical waters. My grandma took me to a little house that she grew up in when she was a child. It was pretty old and felt like it could collapse at any moment. We stayed overnight in a cabin that was sweet. We set up a campfire and ate some s'mores. My grandparents and my brothers were telling some Mexican urban legends. They mentioned La Lorna, El Cucoy, and La Lechuza. They mentioned the chupacabra. My parents have always told me about the chupacabra since I was 6. My brothers were trying to scare me, and they did pretty well. It was bedtime. I went to sleep and dozed off. I awoke in the middle of the night for no reason. I heard a strange noise outside, and I stupidly looked out the window. I couldn't remember much, but I saw a weird, skinny, hairless creature standing outside. I freaked out, and I hid under the blankets. I heard scratching noises all night and couldn't sleep. When it was morning, I woke up and went outside. I went to a tree and saw claw marks scratched on it. My brothers saw it as well. My brother smelled something horrible, and we checked it out. We saw a dead deer with 2 punctures in its stomach. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but my brothers knew what was going on. It's the chupacabra. My brother spoke. We came across another carcass, and it had the same 2 punctures on its stomach. My brothers were really creeped out, and we decided to get the hell out of there. We didn't tell our grandparents and acted like it never happened. 3 years passed, and now I'm 11. I completely forgot about the chupacabra incident, and I was living a normal life. My mom told us that we would visit my grandparents again with my older cousin. I was happy to see them after 3 years. We arrived, and it was normal. We visited Cancun and Mexico City. We went to the same cabin I went to 3 years ago. I started getting back my memories, and the chupacabra incident was back in my head. It was nighttime, so I decided to go to bed. While asleep, I awoke to a scratching sound. I knew it was the chupacabra. I looked out the window this time, not seeing anything. I blinked many times. I gave up, and I decided to go back to bed. I was awoken another time by twigs snapping outside. It was very loud, almost as if I had headphones on. I looked, and I saw a creature that was hairless and skinny. The creature quickly ran away until sunrise. The sun was rising, and I noticed that my window had some claw marks. I had some delicious breakfast and went outside. I went outside and saw broken twigs and sticks. Oddly, there weren't any footprints, but I returned to the tree I saw 3 years ago, and more claw marks were scratched. I told my brothers and my cousin, who saw it, too. We were all spooked out, and we saw the carcass of a deer. It had 2 punctures on its stomach, as usual. My cousin was dumb and went into the forest alone with a blade. It took 30 minutes for him to return. His face looked like he witnessed somebody getting shot. He was pale as a ghost and looked scared. "What happened?" I asked. He lifted up his arm and revealed a huge claw mark. He also had 2 red dots on his back, almost resembling the 2 punctures on the deer. To this day, my cousin still won't tell any of us what he saw or what happened when he went into the forest. I'm just glad that he returned and was still alive. I am not planning to go back to Mexico to see the chupacabra again. To this day, I sometimes still hear the scratching and clawing marks that I heard when I encountered the chupacabra at night. I am just glad that none of us became its next dinner. A few months ago, one of my friends opened up to me about a creature he said he encountered 2 times around New Jersey, where my mother lives. This same friend and I have encountered a skinwalker in the past while being in New Jersey, and he told me that when he was just a boy, he saw something in the fields next to his house. Whatever he saw still terrifies him to this day. He's had 2 encounters with this creature, one in the middle of the day when he was a boy and one waking up in the middle of the night. Here are his encounters with an alleged dogman. These stories are also from his perspective, so I could capture that narrative feel. I hope you enjoy his stories. Hi, my name is Ted, and I've lived in New Jersey all my life. Since I was a kid, I've had all sorts of paranormal and creature experiences for a long time, which I can also tell here in the future at some point. I'm a heavy believer in the supernatural and in dogmas and cryptids, just like my friend Sam here. Here are 2 of my encounters with what I think are dogmen. It was a clear, sunny day as I was walking alongside a trail that was close to my house. I was only about 7 or 8 years old at the time. It was so beautiful out that day, and as a young kid, I was taking it all in. I was having an adventure, picturing myself just running through the open fields, waiting for Mom and Dad to get home. The trail I was on had beautiful scenery all around, with tall grass and miles of fields to my left and dense forest to my right. I was just walking through the woods, as whenever my parents weren't home, that's what I used to do. I was enjoying the walk, taking in all the sounds of nature. The smell of the woods was intoxicating, as were the chirping birds. Then the woods fell silent. I felt like someone or something was watching me, and my eyes darted around the entire area. I then looked to my left and noticed something in the tall grass. To me, it looked like a big dog, but then I saw it was crouched down like a man would be if he were hiding. It was covered in brown fur, looked like it had a muzzle and ears like a German shepherd, and had eyes that were blood red. I thought it was more curious than frightful to me, but I was still on edge. I was scared for a bit, but I acted like I didn't notice it and just went along with my day and ran back to my house. I never spoke about this encounter with any of my family, as they would think I'm crazy, but that was my first encounter with what I think was a dogman. The second encounter only happened about 4 to 5 years ago. At this point, I lived in a different house. This house was close to a large forest, and the biggest predators I've seen around here have been either coyotes or foxes. What I saw that night was no coyote. I woke up in the middle of the night with my throat dry and realized I was thirsty. I went to the kitchen to get some water when I felt a sudden sense of dread and felt like I was being watched. I looked into the window close to where I was, and to my horror, I saw this huge animal in my backyard. Whatever it was noticed me, and it was staring at me with these crimson red eyes. I felt utterly terrified, and to my horror, I saw the animal bare its teeth at me and stand up on 2 legs. This creature then started growling, and I could hear it as my window was open slightly. I also saw its breath come out of its mouth, and I realized that this was a real animal. It looked to be about 7 to 8 feet tall on both legs, with the head of a German Shepherd and a body shaped like a bodybuilder. Whatever it was, I then looked at the fence in my yard, ran to it, and jumped across it into the woods below. I went back to my bed, terrified, and couldn't sleep at all that night. These 2 encounters with these beings have shaken me to the core and made me realize that there are creatures that science refuses to recognize. So, I'll keep this kind of brief, as I know talking about these creatures is somewhat dangerous. My hometown is small and remote, and we were a few minutes out of town. I was close to a lot of these people, mostly teenagers and children, as they shared extracurricular activities through the school, so I grew pretty accustomed to their beliefs. This is related, I promise. Now, I moved pretty far away right before I started high school, but I visited somewhat frequently as I still had family there. My grandmother owned a camp on a small lake. It was very quaint, and it was nice to spend time there. However, as soon as it became dark out, things felt very different. On one side, we had neighbors for miles. On the other hand, it was dense wood. Me and my cousins, one a year older and one a year younger, had always found these woods creepy. We visited now and then, but always became very uncomfortable and soon left. One night, I was traveling back home down south with my cousins and my aunt. These were very remote lake roads, inhabited by very few people. Dense woods bordered both sides. So, naturally, some nocturnal animals were out. But one we saw was very, very different. It wasn't as big as I typically see these creatures described, but it wasn't small either. Maybe the size of a large coyote or a small wolf. We don't live in wolf country, BTW, but it didn't look like either of those. It was crouched back on its hind legs, just kind of chilling out. As we drove past, it turned its head to look at us. It had a pretty blank face, almost like an owl, but without the beak, and a bear's muzzle instead. Its body looked like a poor rendition of a human. Like if you asked a person to draw a person when they had never seen one before. Its legs are bent the wrong way, almost like a horse. It had toes like an alpaca. Its arms were very long, and the most human-like thing about it. It had very patchy, wiry, matted fur. Now, I know it wasn't an animal with mange. I've seen animals with it, and yes, it's scary, but it was nothing like this thing. It didn't really chase us, but it trotted behind us for a while. Everybody was freaking out, naturally, but I think deep down I knew. Can I get any confirmation or information about what this may be? And if so, what precautions should I take to keep this thing away? It happened years ago, but I'm still lost. Whenever I hear stories of unknown creatures, they hardly ever take place where I live, in Virginia. I reside on the absolute East Coast, meaning there are bodies of water branching off from the ocean everywhere. That was heaven for my dad, who loved fishing. I wasn't as interested, but I didn't hate the activity. We always went at night. This whole thing happened around 3 years ago, when I was 13. Ducked up things like this occurrence have happened a few times since then, but those are for another time. It was usual for me to go out with my dad and 2 of my brothers to fish on a walkway that led from a bridge over a body of water a few blocks from my house. Every now and then we would include 1 or 2 of our dogs, and we did so this time around. At the time, we had 4 dogs, but we only brought 3 on this trip. While we left our border collie at home, we leashed up our 2 German Shepherds and Foxhound Akita mix. One of the Shepherds and the mix were mine, and they followed me anywhere and everywhere. We kept them leashed while on the walkway, though, in case someone was walking by. My Shepherd was protective, but never jumped at someone unless she felt the need to, and my mix was just a sweetheart and loved everyone, but really had a thing for hunting anything but people. As my dad got settled with my younger brother in some yard chairs with his dog and started to fish, my older brother and I took my dogs down to the side of the walkway opposite the bridge. It connected to a sidewalk off of the street. On one side of the street, there was the water and boat dock, and an opening to the water underneath the walkway and bridge on the other. Just at the edge of the opening, there were blackberry bushes. Me and my brother, Bill, began to pick at the bushes and occasionally laugh as one another was pricked by thorns. My mix, Buddy, began to stalk past us and a little past the bushes. There, it was practically a small beach with about 10 feet of sand to walk on until it ended in trees, a small forest. This path went on for about 100 feet until it curled to the right. Being idiots, we found it funny that he was acting weird. We completely disregarded his actions and proceeded to the water, crouching in the sand and looking for fish. We saw an otter or two, but nothing special. Buddy, who was lying down, suddenly jumped up, and Bill threw an arm around his waist before he could bolt. He was huffing and growling, staring at the face of the woods. We weren't too alarmed, because Buddy barked at the wind. But the smiles on our faces dropped as my shepherd, Charlie, ducked her head and snarled in a sitting position. Bill suddenly fell forward as Buddy launched himself forward, catching him off guard. Grabbing onto his choker, he squinted and tried to see through the darkness. "What the duck, man?" His voice sounded uneasy and only instilled more fear in me. I glared at the tree line, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. I nearly pissed myself when they did. I quietly called for my brother, not taking my eyes off of what I was seeing. Bill somehow couldn't see it. He couldn't see the huge mass I was seeing. It was dark and covered in shaggy, long hair or fur. Its head was large and topped with two long, pointed ears. Maybe I wouldn't have been as terrified as I was if it weren't standing on its hind legs like a person would. It was around 7 feet tall and stared at the four of us with almost glowing amber eyes. I choked on my breath hard, causing my chest to hurt when my brother grabbed at my arm with his free hand. He wasn't looking at me, he knew it was there now. Buddy continued to bark and huff at the thing, still jumping at it. Charlie was no longer sitting by my side, she was firmly planted in front of me, standing with her ears perked and head low. The only thing that could be heard from her was a low, steady growl. The creature leaned forward, its dog-like snout waving in the air. It must have been smelling the air, smelling us. Bill whispered at me not to move. Even if I could move, I didn't want to. If we were to try to run, there's no doubt in my mind that we would trigger something in this thing's head to immediately chase us down. And there's no possible way that my brother and I could outrun it. There was a sudden flash of light, and I heard my younger brother's dog barking furiously. The beast made a deep noise and jumped back into the darkness of the forest. My father came running into view, asking what had happened and why the dog was going crazy. He had gotten worried when he hadn't heard me or my brother, just the dog. We didn't tell him what we saw. We knew he'd laugh his ass off and torment us about it for the next few months. To this day, I haven't spoken to Bill about it. Not a single time. But I'll never forget how I felt in that moment. The way my body felt as though it were on fire, yet chills ran through me at the same time. It seemed like my heart fell into my stomach. I'll never forget what it's like to fear for my life. Me and my dad went on a hunting trip in Helotes, Texas, for deer season. It wasn't technically in the town but more in the county. It was rifle season for whitetail and axis deer, but not so much. It's all season there, exotic, so not native to the state. We went to buy some supplies in town, buying 5 cans of goods of our choosing. While we also stopped at the cigar shop, I couldn't go inside because of the laws being changed before I turned 18 and now being 21. Let's get back to the topic. As we set up camp and finished, my dad set a fire for our meal, and as he asked like a sarcastic ass, what would happen if we encountered a cryptic? I hated how he asked, but it's my family and my father. I answered, most are to spy on us or probably want us out of their territory. He isn't a believer in cryptography until he sees it, and my dad will soon be a believer. We were in Texas Hill Country, so the terrain is not easy for most beginners. I was used to it, I could jokingly hunt in cowboy boots. So as we sat in one of our spots, the usual quote that I enjoyed was that we were hunting this 500-pound wild boar at the spot we chose. So we wait till we hear the pig behind us, her piglets are there, but movement. I thought maybe a cow or the owner would check up on us. I felt this feeling of unease, as did my father, who had my Remington 870. In case the hog charged at us, he smoked a cigar, and we heard something smell. The coffee smelled like tobacco, like a dog or coyote. We slowly got out until I saw it. I worried, saying in a whisper, "Dad, point, but don't shoot." He nodded. I hoped that he didn't pull the trigger. He saw it, asking, "What is that, son?" I and he were walking in a hurry to our camp. As we got out, we saw this wolf-like creature with black and brown fur, black hollow eyes, fangs, and claws, and as a mix of German Shepherd and wolf, it was like a bigger than the Spanish oak, nearly its size. The oak was there when my dad's friend had land, so from the 90s on, the tree was big enough to size up. I passed 7 feet, so 9 or 10 feet with my 4-powered scope. I heard hoofed, it was a doe staring at me, so when it was close enough to eat the grass and other greens, I had my knife to get my possessions given away. The doe ran away. My dad saw the creature running through my area. I took my patience and stood still in hiding because I felt they wanted to hunt the deer instead of me. Luckily, I was right, it chased the deer before my old man ran out worrying. Damn it, son, couldn't you use a knock or a flare? I had a flashlight to say I'm okay, hinting at his worry. We of course got out with our gear, but not the tent, sadly. We got back 3 weekends later. We luckily didn't have our tent torn by hogs or cattle on the property. A cedar tree 12-foot steps of a claw mark at the tree showed us what it can do. So if you are hunting in Texas Hill Country, be careful, or this dogman will get to you. I grew up near American Fork Canyon. My friends and I had heard stories of skinwalkers, ghosts, and possible other creatures up the canyon. We would always go up there in the afternoon, as my parents didn't let me out after dark, but after I turned 18 and moved out, we started going on night hikes. We would usually go on hikes on or near the full moon because the moon would be so bright you didn't really need a flashlight. We had been doing night hikes for a few months with nothing weird ever happening, not even a large animal sighting, until this one particular night. There was one spot we would frequent. It was pretty flat, with trees on all sides but no overhead canopy, so the moon was the only light we needed. It also had a pretty cool spot with logs around a fire pit pretty far up the tail. It always seemed out of place, but it was a great spot to stop and smoke or even start a fire. We were almost to the pit. My 2 guy friends were in front when we heard this loud, blood-curdling scream. It sounded like an elk, but it was so close to us, we had never seen an elk near that area before, let alone any signs of predators. We decided to keep going, at least to our smoking spot, when we all heard a twig snap right in front of us. My 2 friends both swear and start running in the opposite direction. Since I was shorter and in the back, I didn't see what scared them. I thought that maybe they were pranking me or something. I looked back at them for a second, then faced forward on the path. Right in front was a log for the smoking spot, but there in the moonlight I saw the shape of a large wolf with bright red eyes. I froze up until this wolf thing transformed into a large human, still with red eyes and an animal hood on its back. I have never run so hard in my life. My friends were already in the car, and as soon as I was in the car, we sped away. We never did any night hikes up American Fork or Provo Canyon again. I told my friends what I saw, and they said they only saw the wolf. Wolves are not common in Utah, and to the best of my knowledge, there aren't any in that canyon. But I know it was a wolf, then a large man. Years later, I can still see that scene in my mind, like it happened yesterday. I just recently moved to Arizona. I've never once believed in something that couldn't be caught using modern technology. I'm saying that it's 2018, and I believe that if we wanted to find something, we would find it. It was the eve of Christmas Eve in 2018. My friends and I live in Payson, Arizona, and we went out north of town about 5 to 6 miles onto a trail out into an area secluded from the rest of the town. It was quite cold that night. I was layered up pretty well. We were all set on building a bonfire and having a few drinks. I felt uneasy the whole way up there. I'm a fan of nature. I've never been scared of the dark or being away from people, but that night made me feel very weird. It was eerie. I was setting up the fire, but the whole time I felt I was being watched. Granted, there were several of my friends around me, that's not what I meant. I was being watched. Something in the distance. But first, let me take this back a couple of weeks. It was a day or 2 before Thanksgiving. We ventured out to the same area to have a bonfire and a drink. I didn't drink at all that night. Keep that in mind. I was curious to see what the area around us was like, so while attaining firewood, I decided to go on a stroll past the bonfire just to see what I was up against. Before I could even make it out of the area, I noticed something moving behind a tree. I asked if people were commonly up here, and no one answered me. They kept drinking. My eyes did not leave that figure. Standing behind a decent-sized tree, I could tell it was bobbing its head back and forth like a buoy in the water. I kept thinking, man, whoever this is stupid. I wanted to call out to it, but as soon as I opened my mouth, I couldn't speak. I felt weird. Then whatever this was shot out from behind the tree, running into the distance. I immediately fell on my ass and started pedaling back on the dirt, scraping and cutting my hand as I did it. Everyone around the fire noticed me fall, started to laugh, and thought I was just drunk. I managed to get up and ask, "Did you guys not see that?" They looked at me like I was stupid. For the rest of the night, I felt on edge. Always stay near the fire. Now, back to December 23rd. Usually, I don't drink. I'm not a fan of alcohol, but tonight I decided to let loose and drink a couple of drinks. Captain Morgan rum was my go-to. I was having a good time, we were all singing, just letting loose. What I experienced weeks before wasn't on my mind at all. It was a good night. I got up to go take a leak, and I walked past the truck about 300 feet out near a big rock to piss. I could hear everyone back at the fire conversing and having a good time. I then heard my friend Corbin say my name. I was tipsy, I won't lie, but I wasn't drunk enough to not make out what's real and what's not. I told him to hold on because I was peeing, and he became very persistent, telling me that I needed to see this immediately. I thought to myself that it was weird how quick he was able to move around the rock without me seeing him. So I zipped up and stumbled my way behind the rock. When I tell you guys this, I mean it from the bottom of my heart, that whatever I saw wasn't my friend. It took my mind a second to figure out that it wasn't Corbin. I'm glad I stopped and didn't continue to walk towards it. It was a clear night. Full moon up above, not a cloud in sight. Whatever I saw, the moonlight radiated it. It was on all fours, at first looking like a dog, but I saw its eyes, and when I made eye contact, it stood up. Whatever it was had to have been at least 6.5 to 7 feet tall. I took a step back, and I saw its eyes clearly in the light of the moon. I began to sob. I am a Christian. I heavily believe in God, and what I saw, I thought was the devil himself. I started to cry, and I backed up. But every time I took a step back, it took a step forward. I wanted to call out, scream, or do something, but I was so terrified that I didn't want to be taken or, worse, killed right there. So I dropped to my knees and started to pray. Apparently it didn't like that, and it let out what sounded like someone groaning very loudly in annoyance but having water in their lungs while they did it. At this point, my eyes were closed, and I was sobbing uncontrollably, praying for God to save me. I heard it crunch on foliage while it made its way back into the woods. I sat there crying, and I got the courage to get up and run back to the fire. I fell about 20 feet from one of the trucks and started crawling. At this point, I was screaming, telling everyone to leave, and seeing what I saw. They were all over me, clearly worried, but at the same time thinking I was drunk. I have never once hallucinated while drinking. I know what I saw. I was so petrified, I believe I had a small seizure, and that instantly spooked everyone into leaving. My friend Corbin, as well as others, kept trying to get me into the car. I was still screaming and freaking out. I told them what I saw, and they put out the fire and proceeded to gather their things. The whole time this was happening and everyone was scrambling to their vehicles, I never broke contact from where I saw it. It was standing by the rock, not even 20 yards from where everyone was. I was to the point that everything after that was a blur because I was so horrified, but I could have sworn I saw it smile at me. That was the last time I saw it. Whatever it was, it clearly did not like me. Days later, I was being harassed on Snapchat, ridiculed by those who were there, calling me crazy. All but 2 people. They messaged me, saying they believed me and that they saw something running in the trees after my initial scream. I managed to draw what I believe it looked like as well. Guys, I know it's ducking ridiculous, and if it were me reading this and not writing it, I would call you crazy. But I saw what I saw. Do not make fun of the things you don't understand. And definitely, do not take things we know nothing about as a joke. Especially what I saw. Just to start off, this whole story is a true story from an Oregonian Boy Scout summer camp, the name of which I don't think I can reveal, and takes place from the perspective of a 14-year-old scout, me. The first encounter was had on one of my many solo hikes through the campgrounds, which took me off trail in the hunt for an abandoned part of the camp, a chapel that was rumored to have been abandoned years prior. I had discovered a decrepit trail that was overgrown and looked more like a deer trail than anything else, but after maybe 20 to 30 feet, I found what looked like the rumored chapel, which was only a few worn benches, some trash, and a crumbling fire bowl. As any foolish young scout, I ran into the chapel, meaning to find out what happened there, only to feel like I was being watched. In vain, I looked around at the grounds around me and saw nothing but the overgrown chapel. But even with this, I felt uneasy and began to leave, in case it was a counselor that I couldn't see. But as I rushed out, I looked up to the trees for a final glance, and there above me was a large, dark figure, one that looked to be about the size of a full-grown man, leaping through the trees without making anything more than a rustle that sounded like the wind. Upon seeing this, I rushed back to the main trail and found some of my fellow scouts, hoping that they could confirm what I had seen. I met up with my friend, who will be called Friend A for now, who wanted to come along to see the chapel and did not believe that I had seen anything. We hiked into the chapel to find that one of the benches was newly broken, and there were no signs of whatever had done it, not even the cryptid from before. Satisfied that all was well, we went to regroup with the boys of our troop so that we could go back to camp to get ready for lunch. The walk there was uneventful, and we got ready in time, but before we could leave, we had to grab one of my troop mates, who was, for a merit badge, constructing a survival shack behind the camp. This was all fine until we heard something following us. We thought it was just a deer until it started charging through the brush towards our camp, and we realized that it was on 2 legs, not 4. Everyone in the group collectively ran back to warn the rest of the scouts there, who at first thought we were pulling a prank on them, at least until another scout, friend B, came rushing back, saying someone was walking around by his tent, someone who he thought was us until he saw all of the boys of our troop were gathered by the campfire already. This sent shock through the scouts, causing many of them to arm themselves with sticks, pocket knives, and rocks to defend against whomever it was on our campsite. We all stood there in fear of what it could be, some thinking it was a bear, others thinking it was a man, at least until we all looked up and saw it standing on top of a half-dead tree, leering down at us. This creature was, as I had said, about the size of a grown man. It was covered in brown fur that looked to be short, like a deer or a short-haired dog, and on its head was what looked like the skull of a deer, loosely placed almost like a helmet. Its arms were long and skinny, and its legs were almost impossible to see, but it stood like it was going to kill us all, like it felt no fear at the herd of young boys that were before it. It didn't move for what felt like eternity. We began to think we were seeing things until an adult came back to camp, and upon hearing this, the creature leapt off of its perch and sprung into the woods behind it with a grace that sent a shiver down my spine. None of us ever saw that thing again, and no one was to go anywhere without 2 friends and their knife, a rule that we still loosely hold to this day. I don't know what we all saw that day, but I've heard a lot of stories, both from my family, who are versed in Native American culture, and from this channel, which have led me to conclude that I am lucky to be alive and that I should warn people to be careful when out in the Oregonian woods. There are things out here that go without an explanation, things that won't care who you are or how old you are, they just want to know what you taste like. One night, 6 years ago, I was out in the woods. The time had just passed 9:30, and it was winter, so it was completely dark out. The stretch of wood I was in was in the middle of nowhere out in the English countryside. I had spent all day driving up there through the dense forest that surrounded me. I had brought my 4-season tent as temperatures got to as low as -5 at points during the night, but little did I know that was not what I should have worried about. I set it up swiftly in the dark, using the light of my torch, and set about making the fire. About 2 hours later, I was running low on fuel for it, so I got up and headed out into the darkness of the forest. As a child, I was always confident about being outdoors, so I didn't think much of going about a mile into the woods at night, but as I progressed deeper, I heard a whisper. All of a sudden, around 10 deer came running out at me, almost hitting me. Something spooked them, but despite that, I still carried on. About 2 minutes later, I reached a clearing that let just enough moonlight in to see without my torch, but as I stepped in, I froze. Standing before me was a deer-like creature 5 times the size of any other. Its horns were rugged and sharp, and its long tongue was hanging out of its crooked mouth. I must have stood there for about 5 minutes as my hand felt numb, then it opened its gaping mouth and said, "I see you, it's okay, you're safe with me." It glitched and was almost bleeding in me for around 20 seconds before it stopped. Without warning, it stood up on its hind legs, making it about 10 feet tall, turned, and said, "I told you once to come closer." I turned and ran as fast as I could. I knew it was chasing me, but I didn't care. I sprinted until I reached my car and practically jumped through the window. I drove home in record time. The scariest part about it, though, is that I returned the next day only to find my tent trashed and destroyed. Whatever that deer was, it definitely wasn't from this world and definitely was after me. I'm pushing 60 years old now, and I've had a lifetime filled with unexplained experiences. Here is one of them. My partner of 27 years and I live quite remote, 20 miles from the nearest town. We have very few neighbors, so we know this dog does not belong to any of them. The first time we saw him, he was standing at the crossroads where we turned right to get to our gate. To the left lived an elderly couple. We were returning home from town, and it was close to midnight. My partner slowed down. At first, we thought it was a small cow, but when we got closer, we saw it was a big black dog with glowing red eyes. Assuming it was dumped and being compassionate towards animals, we tried to coax it to come to us, but it wandered or trotted off towards the couple's house. The next day, we found out that, while we had been in town, the woman had died. We were so sorry to hear it, and we had forgotten about the dog and made no connection between her passing and the dog. A few months later, again, We were on our way home, and again, we saw the big black dog. I said to my partner, "Oh my God, look. It's that same black dog we saw before." There he was standing at the crossroads again, and again we tried to coax him, and again he turned and vanished in the shadows, this time towards another couple's home about 1/4 mile west of us. We were up late that night, and a few hours after we got home, an ambulance came past our place. To theirs, the old man had died. Every dog in the area was howling. Not growling or barking, they were mournful howling. So time went by. I never saw the dog again for at least 2 years. Then one day I was inside washing dishes, and my partner was in the basement, and I heard incessant barking outside my door. I went to the door, and there was that dog. That big black dog was barking at my door. So I said, "What is it, boy? What is it?" And he turned and walked off. So I returned to my chores, and suddenly there he was again barking at my door. So I did the same thing as before, and again, he turned and walked away. Again, I returned to my chores, and a third time the dog returned barking at my door, so this time I was resolved to follow that dog. I laid down my dish towel and stepped outside. I followed him approximately 5 steps, and the dog just vanished. As I stood there in shock, my eyes seeking every direction, I thought, where did he go? Where did he go? My partner ascended from the basement. I exclaimed, "Did you see him? Did you hear him?" He asked me, "See who?" I said, "The black dog. He was here, he was just here." Then solemnly, he said to me, "Jim died." I was all like, "What? Jim died?" He repeated it to me. He had come up from the basement to tell me that his best friend Jim's son had just called him to tell him that Jim had passed away. I was in shock and totally speechless. I hugged my partner, and as I did, a revelation in the form of a question flushed through my mind. Is that why the big black dog was barking at our door? Several months later, I was watching a program about the legends of Scotland and Ireland, and there it was, the legendary Black Shuck, the Barghest, or the Grim, who came in the form of a big black dog with red glowing eyes to announce the deaths of friends, family, and loved ones. He is usually seen standing at a crossroads. Sometimes children who were lost in the woods would find their way home only to tell their parents that a big black dog appeared, led them to safety, and then disappeared. So, being as my mother just happens to be Scotch/Irish and my partner is Irish, if you ask me, the black dog is more than a legend. He is real, and we have never seen him again, not once since that day back in 2002, and nobody we know has died since either. This all started in December of 2013. We were having a Christmas party at my place. I invited over 3 friends who were always there for me, Alan, Bruce, and Edgar. We are all from Costa Rica, a place full of wonders and mysteries. Anyway, back to the story. It was now December 24th. My family was eagerly fixing the place and cleaning up since party time was coming. I always thought that cleaning up so much was a bit exaggerated, but they liked doing so I never really commented about it. By 8 p.m., all of the guests had arrived, including my friends. The party was held at a small party ranch located near the house. I took my friends to the house, however, because we wanted to play some Injustice. 30 minutes into the game, we heard branches break around the house. This was normal, as trees grow around the house and small branches tend to fall all around. Since the party was lively, we brushed it off, thinking it was just one of the guests having a smoke or something. 1 hour had passed, and we heard the branches breaking once again. This time it was a little more startling since the sound was coming right out of my bedroom's window, which was located completely opposite from the side where the ranch was located. The weird thing was that the sound completely stopped right out of my window, which pretty much meant that whatever was out there walking around was now right out of my window. We had the blinds down, so nothing could be seen in or out. I looked at my friends while putting down my PS4 controller. "You guys heard that, right?" I asked, as I was a little confused as to why whatever it was just stopped moving. "What are you talking about?" Alan said this as he grabbed the controller from the ground and started playing. I was genuinely scared at this point. I did not dare to open the blinds, so I just watched them play as my mind kept rushing, imagining what could possibly be out the window. After a few minutes more, the branches started breaking some more, and you could hear steps out of my window now. They were quite heavy steps. A really bad odor came into the room. It was kind of like rotten eggs. At this point, my friends heard and smelled what I did and then looked at me. "I told you I heard something before," I said as I walked closer to the window. As I reached to open the blind, I heard whatever was out of the window run away. I opened it as fast as possible since I heard whatever was running away. However, I was unable to make any sense of what I saw next. I simply saw a shadow running in the distance. It was a humanoid figure, but it was quite tall. I stared in shock, and I was starting to turn pale as my friends were as well. I simply said, "What the duck was that?" They simply looked back at me and shook their heads. Bruce said, "Whatever it was, it is still out there." I nodded and grabbed some flashlights from my house since we had some in case the power went out. At this point, I was regretting the idea of going out after seeing that thing, whatever it was, but we were curious teenagers at the time. We all walked out of the front door and walked towards my window. We looked all around, the branches were all broken, and there were hoof prints all over. "Wait a second, these are not footprints." Edgar said he was scared and was turning more and more pale by the minute. We walked around a little more, we walked towards the area where the thing had run off to, and we then heard it. We heard the sound of chains being dragged on the street. In front of my house, there was a small street with pretty much no streetlights since we lived in a rural part of the city. We heard this dragging of chains getting closer and closer. "We should go to the party where everyone is," Alan said as the sound grew louder and louder. I nodded, and we started running back to the ranch, but I did what I should never have done, and to this day it haunts me, and sometimes it does not let me sleep. I turned around and pointed the flashlight at the street behind us. There stood an 8.20-foot humanoid, staring at me. I could make features now. It had a goat face, the eyes were as red as blood, it was all black, and I could perfectly see hoofs instead of feet. I was so frozen that I could not even scream or make any sound. I noticed it taking a step and saw a chain wrapped around the right leg being dragged, as if the creature had been chained before. I started running so fast that I did not even believe I could run that fast, finally catching up to my friends as we ran into the ranch. We were so pale, and we were panting. The guests at the party looked at us a little weirded out to see us in the state we were in but did not ask anything as they continued talking, laughing, and eating. We all sat down at a table, and I explained to them what I saw. They did not believe me, of course, and said that I was too scared and probably hallucinated. I said that they were probably right, but believe me when I tell you that I am 100% sure of what I saw. I will not forget, ever, those killer red eyes and the goat-like face. Later that week, I found out that the creature I saw was something from old folklore called Krampus, or at least it resembled the creature I saw pretty well. I read it was half demon and half goat. It then hit me that what we had smelled back in my room was not rotten eggs but sulfur, which made complete sense now that I had researched a little. I never talk with my friends about that experience anymore, as they will probably just say we were teenagers back then and probably too scared, but today I know that it was no hallucination. Sometimes on Christmas time I hear the chains being dragged around and branches breaking around. Christmas is no longer merry for me anymore. Be careful with some of the legends and myths you read, some of them might be true and may find you and try to harm you. Stay safe, and Merry Christmas. I live in Virginia, on a place known as Camp Peary. It has a very colorful history, to say the least. It has a church that dates back to the Civil War still here, and that's where this happened. It was Christmas break, and I was having a slumber party with my friends. Only one is important, and for the sake of privacy, we'll call him John. We're a group of people who love to be outdoors a lot. We were camping every other weekend, and this was no different. We were outside the same hole, as I had forgotten about the past happenings and just wanted to have fun. A lot of people moved away, but I was actually having more fun with these friends. We were stupidly planning to stay up until 2 a.m. playing airsoft in the woods, and I don't see why that was a good idea. I had all my black clothing on and was almost invisible in the dark forest. Me and John set out to plan an ambush. We hid around the church, inside a brick enclosure, carefully avoid any graves. The plan was in motion, and we could hear what we thought to be other players moving through the area. Of course we couldn't see them, but they were not taking any precautions in terms of noise. We sat there for 5 minutes longer, but then we realized something. These footfalls were heavy. Really heavy. We could hear the ground vibrating with every step. We also realized that it was getting closer, as we hadn't heard this before. We were planning to move away across a street, but not 5 seconds after the thought, something emerged from the woods. The first thing I noticed was the stench that filled the air. It smelled like dead leaves and rotting fish. I actually gagged as the smell only got stronger as it came closer. I honestly thought the smell was the worst part, until I saw its face. It was a deer. Well, it might have been at one time. The head looked like a buck, but the skin was just like a blanket falling off the skeleton. Its ghostly gray frame was all too skinny, and all the limbs looked horribly broken. I held back a yelp as I knew it would tear me to shreds if I gave myself away, but John didn't. He screamed. I snapped my head around to look at him, and as soon as I did, the thing peeked over the wall. There was silence for a split second, and then it screamed. It was nails on a chalkboard, mixed with a scream, mixed with a cat screeching. No animal should ever have been able to make that noise. We wasted time running, firing blindly with the little effect of our airsoft guns trying to slow it down. Luckily, John's house wasn't far away, and we made it back inside. Our hearts were pounding as we slammed the door and barricaded it. It didn't matter what his parents would say in the morning, we weren't letting that thing in. We all slept in John's room that night, or rather, everyone else did. I stayed awake, thinking about what the hell that was. Sadly, I never slept over again after that, and I don't plan to. Listen to your surroundings. You can save yourself from being in a situation like this if you get out before it comes. Stay safe, everyone. I was standing with my older brother, both of us smoking cigarettes, outside on my parents' porch. My family and I grew up in a very superstitious part of the American Southwest. I guess you could say this in a part of America where there is a very strong fear of skinwalkers. I know, another skinwalker story, but what I witnessed alongside my brother felt chillingly real. A few years before this incident, my older brother and I encountered something in our parents' backyard, so we've always been a bit on edge at night around our neighborhood, and still are to this day. That, and we grew up in a culture that discourages people from wandering around at night without some sort of cultural blessing. But we were a few years older, smoking our cigarettes, catching up because my brother was attending college in the city, and I was finishing up my junior year in high school. I was rambling on about something when I saw my brother's startled look out at our neighbor's yard. I looked over at what he was staring at and found myself looking at a shadow figure standing outside our neighbor's house. And it's hard to describe this shadow as its figure was basically blacker than the night outside the dim glow of the street lights, having an almost shadowy radiance if that makes any sense. It was standing on the side of our neighbor's house, and while I couldn't see its face, I knew it was staring at our neighbor's draped windows. My brother and I looked at each other with disbelief. We'd both hear the stories about skinwalkers roaming around at night. I mean, we both witnessed that sort of thing years ago, but it was only a glimpse followed by hearing the most otherworldly, horrifying howl that sounded both human and animal. But this was different, it was like seeing something we were never meant to see. Something even more sinister. We said nothing to each other, turning our gaze back towards the figure, who was still staring at the neighbor's window. After what seemed like a long moment, the figure started to slowly turn and walk to our neighbor's backyard. But the way it moved was a surreal sight. It looked to be moving both slowly and quickly at the same time. Like jogging in place, except it was gliding along. Then it moved towards a group of neighborhood dogs. And I knew these were neighborhood dogs because I recognized almost every one of them under the dim tangerine backyard light, but they weren't scared by the shadow figure. In fact, they looked to be welcoming it. The dogs formed a crowd around the figure, which stopped and, I swear to this day, morphed down onto all fours, sprang a black tail, and disappeared into the night with the group of neighborhood dogs following. I looked to my brother and asked, "What did you put into these cigarettes?" We both nervously chuckled, but we knew what we saw and hurried back inside, making sure we took our cigarette butts with us. Inside, our dad and youngest brother were asleep, but our mom was still up. We told our mom what happened, and she instructed us to go outside to get some wood to burn. She smeared ash on our foreheads, and we ventured outside to gather some firewood. While walking towards the woodpile, we noticed that our street light, which was on when we were heading back inside after stamping out our cigarettes, was out, the only street light out in the entire neighborhood. We saw it as a sign of something being around and hurried to gather the woods. Right when we were about to head inside, we could smell it, the strong, putrid scent of a dead animal. We knew right there and then that we were in the middle of all those stories we'd hear about skinwalkers. We didn't stop to take a look around. Instead, we made haste back into our house and built a fire. We told our mom what we smelled outside, and she marched outside with a fresh tin of ash to confront whatever was out there. She yelled in English and her native language, "Leave us the duck alone, we never did anything to you," and commanded for it to leave by the traditional ways and the way of Jesus Christ. She sprinkled ash outside our front and back porches and anchored a bow and arrow above the door leading out towards the back porch. We slept that night without any incidents. Months later, when I moved to the city to live with my older brother and work for the summer, I got a call from our mom. She told me that the neighbor, who lived in the house that the shadow figure was outside of, died of cancer. Whatever we saw that night still chills me to this day. Okay, so I'm 15. I know you were a bit young to be credible, but I have seen some shit. I lived most of my life up to the age of 14 in Michigan. I lived in the St. Joe area, if anyone is familiar with the area. Anyway, my grandparents lived in the northern areas of Michigan, and we would regularly drive the 4 to 5+ hour drive and go visit them either on the way to our lake house, which was a little farther north, or just to see them. They lived in the middle of nowhere, 25 minutes to town, sort of. Both of their neighbors were a mile in each direction, and their property is huge. They live in a small trailer in the middle of the property. They have 2 pastures on each side of the property, and in the back, they have miles of trails that would take you through the woods. My grandfather usually used this for hunting. I was hitting golf balls from the front of the house into the pasture. I hit all my balls and went to collect them in the pasture. I opened the gate and shut it behind me so none of the dogs could get through, and I walked around picking up balls. A couple of them went farther than normal, so I had to walk back behind the pasture area and into the wooded area. As I was walking, I could hear leaves being crushed, but they were a little off from my steps. I kept hearing this weird noise come from behind me, kind of like a watery sound, I guess. It was like someone just got out of the shower, and they were dripping wet. But this noise kept stopping and starting, so I just thought it was the wind blowing water out of the trees. I found my last ball and turned around to start walking back, and I saw something tall move behind a tree. I could tell it was taller than me, but I didn't really know what it was. Being from Michigan, we've got our fair share of scary asses that would love to bite into your meaty flesh, but this was definitely not a wolf and could not have been a bear. I would have smelled it, so I kind of stood there frozen, just looking at the tree and bushes the thing was near. After a while, the thing started to creep out. It crawled out on its hands and legs. First, I saw its long, skinny arms, followed by its head. It looked up and around and finally looked at me. It crawled the rest of the way out, and I could see the thing whole. It had skinny arms, like it hadn't eaten in a while. Dark-looking skin that had a shine to it, like it was slimy. Its body was just like a mass of flesh. It didn't look to have a stomach or chest, it was just kind of twisted up and misformed. Its legs were just as long and ducked up looking as its arms, and both feet and hands were elongated. Not massively or anything, but you could tell it was longer than your average foot or hand. Its head was the part I had a really hard time pinpointing. It had eyes. There was no hair and a long mouth that wouldn't open. The nose was just 2 holes, and it had a very long, exaggerated chin, but it kind of looked normal in a way. It stared at me, and without opening its mouth, it made the sounds I had been hearing, which seemed to be made by its nose as the holes flared. It started to walk around. Not at me, but just around where it was. Then it stood up on 2 legs. It was probably about 6.5 feet tall, but its look and appearance made it look a lot scary. The thing moved its neck in an unnatural way, and then it looked at me. It was only about 25 yards away. I was way too close for comfort, but I was not about to move and have this creature charge me. All of a sudden, it just bolts right at me. I opened my eyes wide and just prepared, but it ran right by me and through the woods. I turned around, and sure enough, it just kept running. Sometimes on all 4s, sometimes on 2 legs. It's run both ways, which is unnatural. Its body contorted, and it just looked so off. I ran out of the pasture and shut the gate behind me again. I didn't tell my grandparents right away, but a couple months later I did. This was in the summer of 2018. I didn't tell them until about the fall of the same year. My grandfather pulled me aside after I told him and asked me what it looked like exactly. I told him, and he said I'd seen it before out on the trials. He didn't say anything anymore, just for me not to be worried. I haven't really told anyone but family and close friends about this, but I guess that has changed now. This really messed me up for a while. The scary thing is too, I've seen it after. Several times. In different places. Never at my home, but anywhere up north. Even at a lake cabin. I am an hour away from my grandparents. This one was by far the scariest, though. I know it isn't a skinwalker. At least it shouldn't be. I don't know, but does anyone have any idea what it could be? Please help me figure this out. This took place about 2 years ago. Up north, Michigan, not the up. I want to start off with a little bit about me, as it helps in context with the story. I'm a 22-year-old person working in the medical field. I'm a floater medical technician at the moment, which means I get a schedule every week going to different assisted living facilities, skilled nursing facilities, independent living facilities, all the living facilities that usually hold a majority of elderly people, and help with vaccinations and general patient care involving medications all around my state. Sometimes I'm only 30 minutes from home, but I've driven 3 hours before. And most times, they drag on long into the night. Now that you know how I work, I guess I'll tell you about where I live. No names, but I'm basically in the foothills, or mountains, with lots of back roads and lots of trees. I know, typical of scary stories, the middle of nowhere with spooky trees. But once again, I don't think much of it. I've lived around forests all my life, and I see them as peaceful rather than scary. So I finish up this particular clinic at around 6 p.m., and as you know, if you live up north in the winter, it's dark by then. But once again, I'm thinking nothing of it. But even so, I'm tired, hungry, and ready to go to bed. My team calls it a day, and I set up to take my hour and 45-minute drive home. The first 30 minutes, I'm in town, then on a highway, so pretty nice, smooth sailing, listening to lo-fi music as per usual, using it as my decompression and meditative time. I keep driving, then I notice a huge crash up ahead, like a 4 or 5 car pileup, real nasty on this busy highway. So I take an exit off the highway, going to drive around it so I can get home and into my bed quicker, rather than sit and wait for them to clear a path from one of the lanes. Anyway, I start driving through this town, which honestly looks like maybe 3 freaking people live in it. All the buildings are run down, and the road is so messed up, it's awful. My car's poor tires and hydraulic system were begging for me to stop, so I had to slow down a lot so as not to stress my car. It's dark and really old, but again, places like this exist, a town on its last breath. I've seen them more than a few times living up and down the East Coast in less than shitty neighborhoods. I'm not going to judge. But I will note that this place is just really, really empty. No cars, no lights, boarded up houses, just empty. I'm driving between 15 and 20 miles an hour, my brights on so I can see, it's a clear night, so I have that going for me. As I'm driving past this big fire department overrun with bare trees, a loud thunk comes from the roof of my car. Great. I quickly pull over into the parking lot of the abandoned fire department. Wonderful, I'm thinking. Get sideswiped by a random dude at a rest stop and dent the top of my poor Orangeberry in 1 week. I open the door in a panic, expecting to see some tree branches denting my roof, but, nope, nothing. Which is weird enough as is, I'm like, what the hell? I knew something had hit my roof. So I go to check behind my car, maybe it rolled off, maybe it was a bird or a bat that fell and then flew away. There are a lot of trees around here. I walk all around my car. Look at the messed up road. Nothing. I chalk it up to the winged animal idea and climb back in my car. A little rattled. So it's silent as I get repositioned. That's when I heard this ear-piercing shriek. I'm talking, someone is screaming so loudly that it sounds like their vocal cords could break. I lock my door and start getting back on the road. Calm down, I'm thinking. Bobcats are everywhere, you've heard what they sound like, plenty. Like a woman crying bloody murder. It's just a bobcat. It's just a bobcat. My hands are shaking, and I'm trying to drive out of there as fast as I can. Just a bobcat, some kids playing a prank, some homeless tweaker. My car was rattling back and forth as I got up to a comfortable 35 miles an hour. Of course, that's me pushing it for my abused car. I'd make it up to him later with a nice wash. I drive another mile through this town, and I'm a few miles from the exit to the highway again. I'm mentally kicking myself for being so scared. Like a little pansy, I'm freaking out over some animals. I'm a mile away now, thanks to the helpful yet very beat up and weathered signs. I'm calming down, nothing crazy. Maybe it would be a good idea to play my lo-fi again, as I paused that when I got out of my car. Just as I reach for my phone in the passenger side seat, something rushes past my headlights. I scream and brake hard. I don't know why, it was yards away from me, in the very distant part of my headlights. Alright, that's the final straw. I'm crying at this point, shaking so hard I can barely grip the wheel, my eyes blurry with tears. I don't care about the music anymore, and even though I'm still reminding myself that animals inhabit tree-dense abandoned towns all the time, this situation was still enough to get me crying. I keep driving, trying to focus on getting to that damn highway. But that's when I see it. If it's a human, then it's not like any human I've ever seen. On the side of the road, it seemed to stand so politely on the sidewalk, as if waiting for me to pass so it could cross the street. Was this a tall thing? It had sunken facial features and looked naked. Loose skin, a lot of it. Sagging down its legs and arms, piling at the wrists, ankles, and knees, around its neck, and hanging from its jaw. I saw it for half a second before I slammed my foot down on the gas. I'm screaming obscenities now. Duck this, duck that, what the duck? You get the idea. My onslaught of emotions being too much. Goosebumps covered me from head to toe, tears rolling down my face, and hands gripping my steering wheel so tight there's nail marks in it. I swerved onto the highway and recklessly entered the other lane. I drive at 80 for a little bit before eventually slowing down and pulling over to the side of the road to sob and call my dad. He picks up instantly, and when he hears my crying, he's all concerned, trying to get my story. I explained everything. I called it a man in some scary monster costume. And my dad instructed me to call the police. Which I didn't really want to do. I was already a nervous wreck. Had I had to explain it or even go back with someone? Absolutely, EFF that. But my dad insisted, so I called the cops. I tell them, I saw a man in the town back there off the exit, in a costume. He scared me really bad. And after a few more questions, the cops said they'd check it out and sent me on my way. No, I can't be sure it wasn't a costume. No, I can't be sure it wasn't some weird outfit and bad lighting at night. No, I'm not saying all of these events were connected in some way. But what I am saying is that it all happened so quickly that it was hard to dismiss as nothing, and if this was a costume, it had to be a damn good costume because it was hyper-realistic. And I saw every single fold and wrinkle and could even make out a couple blue veins. I don't even remember the name of the town. I haven't gotten a call back from the police about any updates. If there was anyone found with a costume on, stalking the side of the road in a beat-up town at 7 p.m. It happened about a month ago, and I'm better now. As long as I'm in my car, I'm safe. But I no longer feel safe being outside of my car at night. Not even the short walk from my front door to my driveway is safe anymore. I'll start shaking and panting if I'm outside in the dark alone for more than 5 seconds. I don't know who to tell or what to believe, but, at the very least, I hope you guys found it entertaining. This happened in October of 2020 in Plymouth and Helena in Alabama, as I live near the border of the two towns and followed it into Helena from Plymouth. This is a long story, but I want to be as detailed as possible. However, my interaction with this thing was over an hour and a half, and there was a lot to talk about. It's been bugging me along the way, and as much as I try to rationalize what happened, I can't, so I will try my best to tell my story and hope someone else will have had a similar incident happen to them and will be able to get a better understanding of this. On with what happened. I am living with my girlfriend in Pelham, Alabama. We live together in a development. We were doing a regular thing, playing video games and relaxing late around 1 a.m. I can get exact dates and times if anyone is interested. Anyway, I go outside to smoke a cigarette, and I hear a woman yell, "Someone help me." As I live in a development, I think nothing of it, but it continues, and I become curious as the yelling continues for over 5 minutes, and I become a little concerned. So I start to pay closer attention to it, and I believe the yelling is coming across the main road near my development in a small patch of woods. So now I'm thinking it is a fox, as they make an almost identical sound to a woman, and I thought, okay, cool, a fox, but it continues to scream. Someone help me clearly. I am not trying to approach it anymore, and I just almost try to make sure I'm hearing this right. Then it screams, "Please help, and please someone help." This is clear, and I'm sure now that it is not a fox. I approach closer because I think someone needs help, but the screams are moving away from me out of the small patch of forest next to the road down the road, about 50 yards from another development across the street. I enter the development, and now I'm 90% sure this is someone's TV or someone has a Halloween decoration that is making this noise, but it bothers me that I thought I was standing right next to where I had heard it originally. I am now walking in this development, and I texted my girlfriend about what happened just in case someone did need help, but it was probably nothing. I am trying to follow this screaming as it continues almost 2 or 3 times a minute, always using the same phrases, "Please help me" and "someone help." As I am walking down the road, it seems more difficult to follow, and it seems to be coming from much further away now. So I decided to just go home. If someone needed help, I thought, why would they be running so fast as they would have to be to cover the distances? As I am walking back home after 4 or 5 minutes, it then starts again much more loudly, and I now have a much better idea that this is coming from this larger forest near a cell phone tower. I am now hearing the screams in the woods, about 50 yards from me. I am standing on the street, and as I am listening to this, I notice that it is moving quickly relative to me. It moves 50 yards to my right, stops, screams, and helps me, then runs about another 50 yards to my left, and I am baffled that anyone could move so quickly, and this went on for 5 minutes. It only stopped to speak and ran again, and this didn't make any sense to me in any way. I wasn't sure if I should enter the forest and try to help this person. But I still couldn't see it. It was almost as if it were crawling as I saw the bushes moving and heard the twigs snapping and screaming. Then it screamed a different phrase, and over it screamed, "Why aren't you helping me?" It did this rapidly for almost 2 minutes. Then it made a different noise. It started making a very low, almost grunting, growling noise. This is when I became terrified. I couldn't rationalize this. I am hearing the women screaming and making this low, grunting, growling noise over and over. I realize this isn't my imagination, this is insane. I then realize how far I am from my house and how long this has been going on, and everything almost comes together. This thing wants me to come into this forest. It isn't running back and forth at a 50-yard distance anymore, it's almost running back and forth 20 yards, and very close to me, about 10 yards. It refuses almost to leave the woods but wants me badly to come into the woods. The grunting becomes way more frequent along with its movements, almost running faster and faster back and forth. I think I see something low to the ground, possibly white. It's hard to tell, and it's moving quickly. I am also scared so much, so I tried to go to the camera button on my phone but couldn't find it, and that grunting was terrifying. I stopped and decided to call 911 immediately. I know whatever this thing is that isn't friendly is wanting me in the woods. I never heard of this happening to anyone, and that's not good. That tells me this thing probably doesn't leave anyone alive. It hunts, and I was in trouble. I tell the operator where I am and that a woman is screaming. Once the Helena police show up, it stops. I am so sorry for this long story. Most people will be mad they read this whole thing, but if someone experienced something similar, it could be a huge help to the both of us, and if it did, please contact me. The only person I told this to was my girlfriend, and we ended up coming to the conclusion that it was a kid running around with scary noises on a boombox or something. I know this isn't true. So one fine day, I got a text from my friends, "It's a good rainy day. Let's go to a waterfall nearby." Where do they get this energy to climb a hill when it's raining this heavily? Why can't they enjoy a nice cup of tea or coffee and a playlist? Well, either way, there was no point in denying it because they would drag me out of my house anyway. So we decided to set out in the evening. I had a great place in my mind. We reached there around 5:30 p.m. even though I had planned to laze around in my room. Witnessing such a scene of a mountain covered with a blanket of fog and a distant view of a waterfall was worth the trip. There was little to no crowd as it was a weekday. When we started climbing, it took 4 of us around 15 to 20 minutes to reach the waterfall. The view from up there of the city was mesmerizing. There was a very small area surrounded by big rocks at the summit of the waterfall. The flow had created hot spring-style potholes one below another. There were few people up there, around 4 to 5, except us. As the waterfall was loud, it was hard to communicate without yelling. We are the kind of group that just enjoys the company of each other, even though there is no conversation going on. We all sat in one of those potholes in silence, vibing with the feeling of flowing water, the enchanting view, and the sound of falling. It was bliss, and we all drifted off. After some time passed, as I was lost in thoughts, admiring the view, I noticed a small broken branch of white flowers flowing beside me. I watched it flow from one pothole to another. It was peaceful watching it flow off until it went out of view in a thick forest. That's when I jolted out of my daydream. I looked back, wondering what my friends were up to, and they were all still drifting off on their own. One was laying down, enjoying the flow, and the other was sky-gazing. I started noticing something strange. It was quite quiet, and I couldn't hear people talking or laughing as before. I looked back and realized the place was deserted. We were the only ones left behind. When I checked my watch, it made me feel uneasy, because when we came here and sat down, it was around 6 to 6:15 p.m. For what I and everyone else with me had thought had spent 15 minutes idling, there was a 45-minute time gap we could not explain. When I told them it was almost 7 p.m., they all thought I was joking, but after confirming, they had a confused yet blank look on their faces and didn't know what to make of this situation. At the moment, we decided not to overthink it and decided to descend as it was getting dark, but whatever luck we had, the sunset was late that day. As we started our way down with the chit-chat, I was still bugged about the fact that all 4 of us were sitting there, ideally for almost an hour, and none of us noticed, and how I didn't notice people leaving. As I was overflowing with these thoughts, I heard a whistling sound come from the forest edge of the trail we were walking. Just to give you readers a clear idea of the trail, it was a narrow path on the edge of the hill, and down below was a slide of deep forestation. I looked at my friends to see if anyone heard it too, but they all seemed to be busy with their conversation. I shrugged it off, as it might be a bird. As I continued a few steps down, I heard it again, a whistle, which sounded very human. I watched my friends walk in front of me as they all looked in the same direction as the sound came from down the edge. At first, when we heard the whistle, it sounded casual, but as we paced further, the tone changed and sounded way more like it wanted our attention. The conversation between them was slowly dying down as they were starting to realize what the situation was. I also noticed the whistling was coming from the same distance, even though we were moving, as if whatever was making that sound was maintaining the same 5 to 10 meters of distance between us. Well, to say it clearly, follow us. And I guess everyone with me had started to realize this without me saying so. Now the thing about a late-time sunset is that it lights up the sky as long as it does, and in a matter of minutes, it is dark as the middle of a night. It seemed like our luck ran out on us. We were all out of the forest area, but it was pitch dark, and we were at the mercy of our phones. Flashlights and slippery, muddy trails were not much help for our pace. I was walking up front because some turns needed a support hand to pass by. As we were almost out of this forest, I was starting to feel a little hopeful, but only if I knew it was a false feeling. Something happened that none of us had expected. A sound of a branch breaking, followed by a whistle, sent a chill down everyone's spine. My heart was racing faster than ever. I looked back, and everyone was frozen in their tracks like a deer in headlights. I wanted to flash the light in the direction of the sound, but something screamed inside of me to leave it alone. Somehow calming myself, I instead decided to check on my friends. 2 of them were holding on somehow, but the one who was walking in was the last. She had tears in her eyes, almost ready to give up and scream her lungs out for help. Honestly, she would have done that if she wasn't paralyzed by fear. I could sense that she, or none of them, wanted to be the last person standing. I knew everyone, including me, just wanted to run like the hell broke loose, but that would have only led to some serious casualties as the path was filled with sharp stones. I mustered up whatever hope I had left to not panic and walked all the way back, tapping on her shoulders, signaling her to move forward while joking about how she was slowing us down. In my mind, I begged that they would go along and not cause the scene, and for the sake of whatever hope I had left to not panic, I walked all the way back, tapping on her shoulders, signaling her to move forward while joking about how she was slowing us down. In my mind, I begged that they would go along and not cause the scene, and for the sake of it, they did, laughing awkwardly at the joke and pacing forward. All life on Earth, including humans, animals, birds, and even insects, shares one thing in their DNA that is instinct, a necessity for survival. At that moment, not out of fear, but something inside us was telling us that something was lurking in that slope of thick forest, the slope that was nearly impossible to stand on or walk through for any normal human. Somehow we all knew, but we absolutely cannot acknowledge the whistle or that there is something in those bushes. After what felt like forever, we managed to get out of the forest. We rushed towards our bikes and took off as fast as we could. Coming into the city, the sound of traffic and lights calmed us down. I noticed we were all shivering from the cold and maybe fear. I made a stop at a tea stall, and the warmth of the tea was soothing. As time passed, the fear started to fade away, and curiosity took its place. We started brainstorming about what actually happened to us. Were we scared of random noises? Was our brain messing with us out of fear? Many theories and logical reasoning can be created out of it, and we came up with the best theory, that it could have been a bird that mimics humans. Sound reasonable, right? After all, some crows and parrots can basically have conversations. How hard can it be for it to whistle? And we all shrugged it off. As the days passed, it still didn't fit right with me, so I decided to do some research about this place, like, what kind of birds and animals are found in the area. Well, to my surprise, there were none of the native birds that could mimic sounds. Also, it is supposed to be the hunting ground for kites. So birds smaller in size tend to avoid the area, which throws parrot theory out of the equation. As I went down the rabbit hole, I found something that made my blood cold and made matters much worse. Apparently, there were several cases of suicide and the accidental deaths of many men, women, and children, some of whose bodies were never found. Police officers always seal the entrance with barricades during heavy rainy days, but some locals always manage to slip past and have met with such unfortunate accidents. I could not find any stories similar to ours, but then again, this spot was not known to many and was only known to locals. I am documenting this. To this day, I have no explanation for what could have happened to us that day. Ghost? Or something out of folklore, like skinwalkers? Or a mind game of fear? I would leave this to your imagination.